everyone, and welcome to COM415 Performance Practicum. This semester we are going to be creating the performance seizing, personal stories of people living with seizure disorders. This production comes from my research. I spent time speaking with people who live with seizure disorders and asking them, what is it like to live in your body? Tell me stories of what it means to live with seizure disorders. Begin where you'd like to begin, end wherever you would like to end. And I spent time with them, and they told me many stories, and only a few of them are making it into this production that will be somewhere between 30 minutes and 45 minutes. But before we create seizing, you need to know what performance ethnography is. And what performance ethnography is it is a method that changes research data into an interactive performance for audiences. So before we talk about performance ethnography and the nuts and bolts of what it means to put together a performance ethnography, I want to talk to you first about where performance ethnography fits in performance studies. So here's a very brief overview. Performance studies began in the 1900s. What happened was people realized that in order to go above the social class they were born in society, if they wanted to get occupations, if they wanted to move in social circles of people that had more money and power than they did, they had to learn to speak and carry themselves like people who had money and power. And so they would work with elocution professors, and those elocution professors would teach them how to speak, how to have the body language and the poise of someone who had the job and position in society that they wanted to have. If you've ever seen the stage production My Fair Lady, or read the book it is based on, Pygmalion, it follows a woman who sells flowers on the street and how she meets an elocution professor that takes a bet to see if he can pass her off as a high society lady. And that is the entire storyline of that particular show and book. Well, in the 1950s, people started talking about this idea that not only do we want to be able to carry ourselves well, to read poetry and books with very nice diction, but also something changes when we perform literature rather than just read it. That changes how people see it and understand it and interpret it, that the body and the voice of a performer can change a written text. And we kept moving from there. In the 1960s, we started talking about this idea that social behavior is performance. How you might act when people see you versus when people don't. How you might act in some social circles as opposed to others. And that moved in the 1980s to say, let's really look at every interaction a person has with their world as a lived experience and a performance where they're becoming who they are. And that comes to this idea of performativity. Essentially, you become who you are through your interactions with other people. So by people looking at you and responding to you, you respond back to them, and who you are is a continued negotiation. If people tell you over and over again, wow, you seem so confident, or you're so outgoing, or oh my goodness, you're so good at doing this particular activity, you begin to believe them. Or you don't believe them, you struggle against, why are people seeing me this way when this isn't true? A similar kind of thing can happen even from the moment we're born. When the doctor says this is a boy or this is a girl, we learn to become who we are. And as people get older, they might embrace those expectations of society, or they might reject them and push back on those expectations. And this is the ongoing performativity, the production of how we become ourselves through interacting with others. And we get broader social meanings. We understand gender, we understand race, we understand social class. We understand all of these things through our ongoing interactions with other in a culture. But just like these are made, their interactions, we can also resist them. We can break them down and create new understandings. And that's what we're going to do with seizing. With seizing, we're going to tell the stories of people living with seizure disorders so that those who live with seizure disorders can feel in community and can hear that their stories matter and that those stories should be told to other people so that other people can have more understanding and openness to what it means to live with a seizure disorder. And it also helps those who don't know anything about seizures to have a broader understanding and to be more at ease and to help with advocacy and inclusion for people who are living with seizure disorders. There's this powerful idea of, let me tell you a story of what happened to me. And through telling that story to another person, we build connections, we build understandings, and as we move through, and those understandings are now informing how we interact with other people, we can transform the understanding society have about that particular experience. So this idea of performance ethnography might not sound revolutionary now, but when it first came around in the 1980s, it was. Because this idea that rather than the researcher going out and observing from a safe distance away so they wouldn't be influenced, so they wouldn't form into having too close to their participants so it would somehow cause problems with their experiments or cause problems with their analysis and interpretations. And instead people said, no, I want to live with my participants. I want to be with them. I want to understand them. And I want to empathize. I want to be friends. And I want to move not only to not being a detached observer, but being someone who is close and emotionally invested in the people I'm conducting interviews with or the people that I'm observing. I also want to be aware of their struggles, of the stigma they're having to live with. If they're being rejected or misunderstood or not given the opportunities of other people, I want to help them get those opportunities with this research. And a researcher has that social capital in that way of, I'm an expert. So I can tell people what the people I'm living with, the people I'm listening to, the people I'm working with want them to know. And then we can work together for more inclusion. And that's what I want to do for seizure disorders. I want people to understand seizure disorders so they're not having assumptions and they're not having judgments and they're more at ease with having seizing bodies among us because some brains cause seizures. And if people have seizure disorders, we want them to be as radically included in society as someone who does not have seizure disorders. So when we think about performance studies, there is an ethic that we move through. We feel the responsibility to make a difference in the world, to contribute to the quality of life and enliven the possibilities for those we study. So we're not just trying to have people understand, okay, now I know all the differences between these different kinds of seizure disorders. We want them to realize people with seizure disorders deserve the same opportunities and the same acceptance and the same level of inclusion of people who do not live with seizure disorders. And through this production, we are able to help people with seizure disorders get the support they need and the inclusion and the opportunities that they need. We're participating as active change agents for people that live with seizure disorders. And not just for them, but with them. I'm collaborating with these storytellers, letting them know this production, getting their feedback as we put together a performance for audiences about seizure disorders. Now, there's things I want you to think about. Whether you are doing a performance for this particular show, or if you might be working behind the scenes, or if you're doing a combination. Remember, there's power to carefully listening to another person's story. And listening to it so well that you memorize it, that you know it, or that you've listened to it so many times you're creating a poster to draw people in to what that story is about and get them to come to the show. That's an investment. That's a deep kind of listening that we may not do in daily conversations. Also, we're taking the time to empathize with what it means to live each of these narrators' experiences. That means we don't judge them. It means you don't say, well, I don't agree with this. That's not your job. Your job is to say, what was it like for them? How are they feeling right now? And how can I communicate that feeling and that response in an empathetic way to an audience And also we want to conduct research to understand that experience. Well, I'll have you do some readings on seizure disorders and ask you to take the time to learn more, to research online, to read more, and I'll give you different websites you can look at for that. As well, I'll assign you some readings on what it means to live with seizure disorders, in addition to your readings of what it means to tell stories and put together performance ethnographic productions. Remember, in the end, what this is about is taking this personal story of one person living with seizure disorders for them to then understand what it's like to live in a society that has people that live with seizure disorders, that there's all kinds of different people in society with different kinds of understandings about seizure disorders. So it's not just this person, it's seizure disorders as a lived experience or a phenomenological experience. We sometimes say, Sue, you can say that seizure disorders are a phenomenon of living in a human body that the different human bodies experience. And then we want to connect that understanding of that personal story and that understanding of what it means to live with seizure disorders to the broader culture of, listen, this is around us, this is something we need to understand and support and advocate for those who might be facing rejection or marginalization from others for living with this, to help the audience then incorporate that into their lives and transform how they think about seizures, how they talk about seizures, and how they respond to people living with seizures, and how they try to create a space for others to understand and be inclusive of those that live with seizure disorders. So it's this connection from the story to the social or phenomenological experience, and then to the audience's lived experience beyond the show of how they understand and interact based on what they've learned. Can you think of this idea of become a world traveler? By traveling into someone else's world, of the world of people living with seizures, we have a greater possibility for identification, of understanding, and to get a glimpse of the world through their eyes. We can never truly know what it's like to live with seizures, but we can develop a greater understanding and empathy and feeling of inclusion for those that do through this ongoing experience, and then help the audience also have that experience. And I want you to share that experience without judgment. Remain in dialogue with your audience to talk through misconceptions afterwards. So we're going to have a talk back afterwards where the audience can ask questions, and we're going to prepare for that talk back. And if there are some misconceptions, that's a chance to correct them or to help them get a deeper understanding. Essentially, we want our storytellers' time and energy to result in increased understanding and inclusion for people that live with seizure disorders. And I have a personal connection. That little boy on that slide is my 8-year-old son, Tony. And Tony knows that I conduct performance ethnographic research and that I stage productions. And after seeing me stage one show about people living with physical disabilities and another show about people living with memory loss, Tony asked me to stage a show that was about him. And so he has been very excited about this project. He can't wait to see it. I've read the script to him, and he's read the script himself. We're very excited, and I'm so excited you're here. Because you're here, this is possible. So thanks so much. There is going to be a brief quiz to make sure you have some of the fundamental understandings, and we will move on. I will see some of you on Tuesday, and remember to do your readings for next week. Thanks so much.